What's happening everyone, my name is Alex and welcome back. Today I have a highly requested camera comparison between the GoPro Hero 10 Black and of course the iPhone 13 Pro. As always, we are gonna split this video in three sections. The first section has to do with the sound quality from the internal microphones, the second section has to do with the image stabilization, and lastly video quality. And with that being said, don't forget to press that like button and let's start by checking out some sample recordings so we can figure out which device has a better internal microphone. Alright, so for this quick audio test, I am outside as you can see for yourself, and it's also a bit windy. So with the iPhone 13 Pro, I'm using the ultra-wide lens on the back and recording in 4K at 30 frames per second. Where with the GoPro 10, I have the lens set to super view and once again recording in 4K at 30 frames per second. It's also a bit windy, so you're gonna hear some wind aside from my voice and some cars passing that way and maybe some water to my left. So yeah, this is how the internal microphones on these two devices would capture sound if you're outdoors basically. Okay, for our second audio test, I am indoors and I'm using the front-facing camera on the iPhone 13 Pro and of course recording in 4K at 30 frames per second. Now on the GoPro 10, I am using the lens set to wide and once again recording in 4K at 30 frames per second. And I'm holding the devices about 2 feet away from my face, and it's also pretty quiet in here. I mean, I have a fan somewhere there, but you shouldn't be able to hear that on the internal microphones. So yeah, this is how the internal microphones on the iPhone 13 Pro and the GoPro 10 would sound like. Okay, so if it's windy out, the internal microphone from the iPhone 13 Pro doesn't do that great, and I find that the GoPro 10 does cancel the wind much better. So I feel that the sound quality from the GoPro 10 is much better than the sound quality that we get from the iPhone 13 Pro. So going forward, we are just gonna use the audio from the GoPro 10. Next, we're going to move on and check out some sample recordings so you can see how the image stabilization works. Now, I've done a similar video between the GoPro 10 and the iPhone 12. And under that video, GoPro left a comment saying that they know about some issues that there are with the GoPro 10 regarding the image stabilization, and they are working on a fix. I'm gonna leave a link to that video in the video's description just in case you wanna check it out. And this is the comment that they left under my video. So let's check out those sample recordings and I'll be right back. Okay, so for this quick test, I am recording in 4K at 30 frames per second with both cameras. The lens is set to wide on the GoPro 10 and on the iPhone I'm using the main camera. I'm gonna walk fairly slow at the beginning. We're gonna speed up in a couple of seconds just so you can see how that image stabilization works. So now I'm speeding up and I'm gonna start running as well. So yeah, 4K at 30 frames per second, GoPro 10 and iPhone 13 Pro. For this test, we're gonna see how the image stabilization does if you're just holding the device in your hand and you're just panning it left and right. So I'm recording in 4K at 30 frames per second with both the GoPro 10 and of course the iPhone 13 Pro. On the iPhone 13 Pro, I'm using the ultra-wide lens, where on the GoPro 10 I have the lens set to super view. So now I'm gonna pan the devices right slowly. I'm trying not to move them at all. Now I'm also gonna do a couple of steps ahead, just so you can see how that image stabilization does. And I'm gonna pan back left. For our next test for image stabilization, I am recording on the main camera on the iPhone 13 Pro and recording in 4K at 30 frames per second. I'm doing 5.3K at 30 frames per second with the GoPro 10, and I also have the lens set to linear and horizon leveling. Of course, I'm gonna start running in just a second just so you can see how that image stabilization works under these conditions. So I'll try going as fast as I can. Of course, this is where the GoPro does much better than the iPhone, but again, we'll have to see how this footage looks on the computer. So yeah, this is how the image stabilization looks like under these conditions. Okay, so as you've seen for yourself, if you're just moving nice and slow, the image stabilization from the iPhone 13 Pro is better than the image stabilization that we get from the GoPro 10. So only when you're moving nice and slow. However, as soon as you start moving fast, you're doing sudden movements, the image stabilization from the GoPro 10 is unmatched by the iPhone 13 Pro. Hopefully they do come out to that fix, and then the image stabilization will be better on the GoPro 10 altogether than the iPhone 13 Pro. Okay, so we're gonna watch a couple more recordings so we can talk about the video quality. So let's see those and I'll be right back. Okay, we have one of our first recordings between the GoPro 10 and the iPhone 13 Pro. So the GoPro 10 I'm recording in 5.3K at 30 frames per second, and I have the lens set to wide. Where with the iPhone 13 Pro I'm using the main camera and recording in 4K at 30 frames per second. I'm gonna keep going this way. It is a bit more shady around here, but we are walking towards the sun. Here you're also gonna hear the water aside from my voice, and it's also a bit windy, so keep that in mind. I'm gonna walk a bit faster just so you can see how that image stabilization does while walking a bit faster. And I'm also gonna run for a bit. So yeah, this is how recording between the GoPro 10 and the iPhone 13 Pro would look like under these conditions. So 5.3K at 30 frames per second on the GoPro and 4K at 30 frames per second on the iPhone 13 Pro. Alright, our next recording is a bit more challenging, mostly because it's bright out here but not that bright out there. So I'm using the main camera on the back of the iPhone 13 Pro and recording in 4K at 30 frames per second, where with the GoPro 10 I'm filming in 5.3K at 30 frames per second and using the linear mode. Now, from what I'm seeing on the screens here, the GoPro doesn't do too bad. I was actually expecting it to do worse than this, mostly because of this massive change in brightness in the same frame basically. So yeah, this is how recording would look like under these conditions between the GoPro 10 and of course the iPhone 13 Pro. We are moving on to our next recording. For this recording I'm doing 4K at 30 frames per second with both devices. On the iPhone 13 Pro I'm using the ultra wide lens, where on the GoPro 10 I have the lens set to super view, so the widest field of view available, and of course the image stabilization is set to boost on that GoPro 10. We also have a motorcycle revving its engine somewhere to my right, so you're probably gonna hear that as well. So yeah, this is how recording between these two devices would look like on a pretty sunny day, I'm gonna say. Okay, so for video quality, everyone is gonna have a different opinion. People like those vibrant colors from the GoPro 10, the extra contrast added in those recordings, but me personally, I do prefer all the recordings done by the iPhone 13 Pro. The dynamic range in those videos is better, the colors are better, the sharpness seems to be better. Now, if you do look at those videos, they do seem sharper from the GoPro 10, but I believe that that's artificial over-sharpening. So I still prefer the video quality from the iPhone 13 Pro. Next, we're gonna go on and check out one more sample recording in low light. And as we all know, action cameras don't do that great in low light, but let's watch that recording and I'll be right back so we can talk about it. We are moving on to a quick recording in low light between the GoPro 10 and of course the iPhone 13 Pro. On the iPhone I'm using the main camera and recording in 4K at 30 frames per second, and on the GoPro I'm recording in 4K at 30 frames per second, and I have the lens set to wide. We're gonna walk this way. It gets kind of dark around here. So here you can see a massive difference in video quality, brightness and everything else between the iPhone and of course the GoPro. Action cameras aren't exactly designed for low light recordings. They're designed for daytime. So no action camera that I've tried up until now does good in low light. So this is just an example so you can see the difference here. So yeah, this is how recording in low light between the GoPro 10 and the iPhone 13 Pro would look like. Okay, so as you've seen for yourself, if you're recording videos in low light to the GoPro 10, well, the footage is pretty much unusable. Now, I was kind of expecting that because I've done another comparison between the GoPro 10 and the iPhone 12, as I said earlier, so I knew exactly how the footage was gonna look like, so I wasn't surprised. Now, in all fairness, I haven't came across any action camera that does good in low light. They all do pretty bad because the sensors in there are pretty small, so they cannot capture that much light. So action cameras are designed for daytime recordings. So there you have it, the GoPro Hero 10 Black and the iPhone 13 Pro. Which one do you guys prefer and why? Oh, and don't forget to leave a like before you end this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.